News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Tonight, we're tracking a high tornado threat in the Midwest. Then, a company operating dozens of U.S. hospitals declares bankruptcy. What does this mean for the many communities involved? And an ICU where 5 mother-daughter duos work together on the CBS Evening News.
This morning I was on the call between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu. We are closely tracking what is happening on the ground.
We continue to provide a majority of the votes necessary to get things done. Those are just the facts.
The judge has a conflict that like nobody's ever had before. You're going to take a look at it. He's taken away my constitutional right to speak.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump is threatened with jail time as he is found in contempt of court for the 10th time over gag order violations. We're tracking the latest from New York. But first, a day of diplomacy at the White House. Tensions grow as Israel says it will continue its operation in Rafah to pressure Hamas into releasing hostages, while Hamas says it accepts a ceasefire deal proposal. And stateside, President Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this morning. He also had a private lunch with a top Middle Eastern ally, Jordan's King Abdullah II. Our Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House. Hey there, Ed. Good to see you. Lots of news breaking here. But what do we know about Hamas accepting this ceasefire deal, and what are both sides saying?
CIA Director Bill Burns, Caitlin, remains in Doha, Qatar, trying to continue negotiations between Hamas and Israel. Egypt and Qatar also, of course, involved in these talks. And at this point, the White House says it is reviewing the particulars. It is waiting for a response from the Israeli government and is in essence, like the rest of us, waiting and seeing what the two parties ultimately decide to do. Once again today, the president reiterating in a statement after his call with the Israeli Prime Minister that he opposes any significant ground offensive into Rafah there in Gaza, even as the Israeli Prime Minister overnight was telling people to start leaving parts of that area so that the offensive could begin. But this announcement of Hamas's approval of this Egyptian-Qatar ceasefire deal came hours after the call between the president and the prime minister, and just around the time that the Jordanian king was arriving here at the White House for a previously scheduled private lunch with the president.
Yeah, do we know any more about what exactly this call between Biden and Netanyahu involved? I don't know if they gave any sort of readout.
They have, and it essentially was officially called today is the Jewish Holocaust Remembrance Day. The president wanted to officially convey his views on that. But otherwise, the White House says that they talked about plans to secure a hostage deal, including through ongoing talks today in Doha, Qatar. Prime Minister agreed to ensure the reopening of the Kerem Shalom humanitarian corridor, and then the statement says the president reiterated his clear position on Rafah, as the White House did throughout the day as well, even though tonight we know there have been at least some missile attacks or some kind of explosives sent over the skies of Rafah, though that isn't necessarily considered the ground offensive that Israel has been warning about. In the lunch with the Jordanian king, Caitlin, we should call this out as well. The king, at least in a statement afterwards, says that he warned President Biden of the repercussions of the Israeli ground offensive, which could cause a regional spillover of the conflict, the king warned, and later added that he was reaffirming Jordan's rejection of any attempts to displace Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and any attempts to separate them. So in essence, reiterating at least Arab concerns and Jordanian concerns about what could unfold in the coming days should that offensive in Rafah begin and should it lead to the displacement of the millions there in Gaza with nowhere else to go right now.
Yes, some key conversations happening here. We also know that the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, met with Jewish students today. What was on the agenda, and what's the significance of the second gentleman meeting with these students?
these are the grandchildren of survivors of the Holocaust, and it's part of his ongoing push to draw attention to anti-Semitism or the concerns about it around the world, something he's been working on for the last several years. He, of course, is Jewish, the most senior person to ever, in essence, serve as a first or second spouse to the president or vice president, and it's been one of his sort of cause celebs since they took office, but obviously with a lot more urgency since the conflict began last October. And so it's part of an ongoing series of meetings he's had with Jewish leaders of all ages, and at this time of year, of course, sensitivity to college students, given the protests that have been playing out in recent weeks, given the graduation ceremonies are nearing, and given, frankly, the Biden-Harris reelection campaign's need to win over younger voters. We should point out as well, the president is set to give a speech tomorrow on anti-Semitism at the Capitol as part of a Holocaust Remembrance Day event. And the first time he is set to speak on this issue in such a formal way, the White House saying he's eager to do so, and it will touch broadly on the concerns of anti-Semitism, not only in the United States, but around the world.
Yeah, pressure building from multiple sides on Biden. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much for your reporting. We appreciate it. And the judge in Donald Trump's New York criminal case has found the former president in contempt again for violating his gag order. He is now threatening Trump with jail time for his continued behavior.
Basically, I have to watch every word I tell you people. You ask me a question, a simple question, I'd like to give it, but I can't talk about it. Because this judge has given me a gag order and said you'll go to jail if you violate it. And frankly, you know what? Our Constitution is much more important than jail. It's not even close.
All right, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman. Hey, Katrina, good to see you. I know you've been reporting at the courtroom all day. So former President Trump has been held in contempt again for violating this gag order. This is the 10th time. What is the president saying about this?
Hi, Caitlin. Good to be with you. So what Trump said in this instance is he criticized the jury. He was doing a television show interview, and he complained that the jury was picked too fast, that it's 95% Democratic, and he said that this is an unfair process. When we had the hearing on this gag order violation last week, or a few others as well, you could tell that this was the one that really perturbed the judge because he is very concerned about the safety of this jury. He wants them to not feel under threat, not worry about their loved ones as this trial continues, and he wants to protect the legitimacy of this process. So he found Trump in violation again with the $1,000 fine, which, as a reminder, is the maximum financial penalty he can give for this. And the only other option is jail time. He could give Trump up to 30 days in jail, and he has now said that this is very much on the table. He sees that $1,000 fines are not enough of a deterrent, and so if the prosecution asks, and this continues, it seems very real that Trump could receive jail time for future gag order violations.
It's significant for those on the jury, especially since this is such a high-profile case here. You mentioned the judge, Juan Merchan. He has warned of further violations could come. We're also hearing that the Secret Service have been planning for a possible potential imprisonment. What would that actually look like?
So, of course, the Secret Service is not sharing their plans, but we know some things that could potentially happen. And the judge actually said he was concerned about the Secret Service in this instance. But it's said that there would likely be a rotation of Secret Service officers. Trump would be isolated. There's a possibility that he could be put somewhere like Rikers, where apparently there is a facility that could accommodate him, the Secret Service, and there wouldn't be other inmates around. There's also apparently a cell that's behind the courtroom where this trial is happening. So potentially the judge could, maybe as sort of a jail teaser, give Trump a bit of a time out there, and he would, of course, have Secret Service protection in place. It's also been said that they would be doing things like screening his food and personal items to, of course, make sure that the former president remains protected, even if confined in jail. And like all things and many of Trump's legal problems, this is really uncharted territory. No state or federal prison system has ever had to deal with this before.
Yeah, I mean, we just use the term unprecedented every day in this trial. That's certainly the case for that description there. I want to ask a little bit about what happened today, Katrina, because you had the former Trump Organization controller, essentially the accountant Jeffrey McConney, was called to testify today. What did we learn from his testimony?
So Jeff McConney was important for finally bringing in the falsification of business records aspect of this case, because actually this is the first day we have heard about that. And Trump is in fact charged with 34 counts of falsification of business records. But until now, we had really heard about the larger scheme at play here, the catch and kill scheme that the prosecution has been laying out, where Trump, David Pecker, and his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, were trying to suppress damaging stories, the alleged payoffs to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, but Jeff McConney finally brought in how this was dealt with at the Trump Organization and these paybacks to Michael Cohen. In particular, he brought up a conversation he had with Alan Weisselberg, the former chief financial officer at the Trump Organization, and he talked about how he basically threw a pad at him, told him to take notes, and laid out how they were going to pay back Michael Cohen, and most importantly, how it was going to come out of Donald Trump's personal bank account, and how these checks were signed by Donald Trump at the White House as well.
All right, some juicy information there. Katrina Kaufman, thank you very much for covering this for us. We appreciate it. An American soldier is being held in Russia on charges of criminal misconduct. An Army spokesperson says Staff Sergeant Gordon Black has been stationed in South Korea. He was arrested on May 2nd in Russia for allegedly stealing from a woman in a Russian port city near North Korea. It is unclear how he got there. Officials confirmed he was in the process of transferring back to the U.S. and was not there on official travel.
And even though we're in the minority, we effectively have been governing as if we were in the majority.
And Democrats continue to prop up the House Republican majority as GOP infighting continues on Capitol Hill. Next, we'll speak with veteran Republican Congressman Tom Cole, who says he's fed up with his party's insurgents. We're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
It's just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
As we've been covering, Hamas officials say that they have accepted a ceasefire deal proposed by Egypt and Qatar. Shortly after Hamas accepted the proposal, Israel proceeded with airstrikes in Rafah, saying the deal was, quote, far from meeting its demands. Israel says it will continue with ceasefire talks, but intends to move forward with ground operations in the area. Republican Congressman from Oklahoma, Tom Cole, joins us now, and he's also the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. Mr. Chairman, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So Hamas has reportedly agreed to this ceasefire proposal. What's your reaction to that development?
Well, I think we don't know enough yet about what the details of that proposal are. Quite frankly, it really doesn't matter unless Israel agrees to it, and Israel is the aggrieved party here. They were the country that was brutally attacked on October the 7th. Hamas still holds 130, as far as we know, hostages, a number of whom, 5 to 8, are Americans. I think the Israelis are pretty determined to destroy the military capability of Hamas. So I think they've made it abundantly clear they don't consider this over until they've achieved that objective. They're a good friend and ally of the United States. We ought to be supporting them.
Congressman, I want to shift gears a little bit to domestic issues. My colleague Norah O'Donnell spoke to Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries for 60 Minutes. That aired last night. And it was interesting because he said that his party, the Democrats, have effectively been the governing majority in Congress. I'm curious what you make of that.
Well, frankly, it's just simply not the case, with all due respect to my friend, Leader Jeffries. The reality is, if they were the governing majority, he'd be the speaker, and he's not. And the things that have gone through have been largely bipartisan. That's not a big surprise. We have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic president. They're not getting a lot of the things they want. We're certainly not able to get a lot of the things we want. So where we can work together, we have. But the reality is the House is safely in control of Republicans right now, albeit by a very narrow majority. I think if we win the presidency, and I expect President Trump will do that, then we'll have a larger majority on the other side of the next election.
But it is such a slim majority, and you have had to depend on Democratic votes to get major legislation across. I mean, just recently, as you know, you're the chair of the Appropriations Committee. We were championing that foreign aid coming across. That was helped by Democrats. You also were the deputy whip of the Republicans. You know how to count votes. I'm curious how important in this slim majority have Democrats been in getting things done in this Congress?
Well, the reality is on a number of things they have been important. Other things like energy or securing the border, they haven't been. But our biggest problem is a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president. Now, again, the business of the country has to go on. When we get large, substantial, bipartisan majorities to do things, as we were able to do in the foreign aid package, then we move ahead. And again, we're happy to do that. But I don't think that means they're running the House. It means we've got a very narrow majority. About the only things you can get through are things where there's consensus between the two parties.
There's also been some intra-party fighting, as you are well used to. Speaker Mike Johnson today met with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Of course, she is threatening to move forward with these efforts to push him out. How concerned are you that that effort could be successful?
I don't think it's likely to be successful. Now, I take it very seriously. Obviously, we've lost a speaker. But we did that when 8 Republicans cooperated with every single Democrat to achieve that objective. In this case, I don't think there's 8 Republicans. And the Democrats have clearly signaled they don't want to plunge the House into chaos. That's a responsible move on their part. But last time they did allow themselves to be leveraged by 8 dissident Republicans, and that set the country back, I think, and cost us a great speaker in Kevin McCarthy. I don't think that's going to happen to Mike Johnson. It's, again, my hope that my friends that have talked about vacating will rethink that position and not move ahead. If they do, they're going to have very few people voting with them. I doubt we'll ever even vote on that motion. I would suspect it would be immediately tabled by an overwhelming bipartisan majority in Congress.
This idea, though, of kind of the fragility of the conference, just given that slim margin and these repeated attacks on Johnson's position, does that have any effect on your ability to govern between now and Election Day?
Not in my view. Again, the obstacles we have in governing are largely the fact that we're dealing with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president, and you have to pass bills through both chambers and get them signed by the president. We don't have the ability to override a presidential veto, and obviously we don't control the Senate. So it narrows the options. This is a majority that can stop things from happening. We stopped the Democratic spending spree domestically on things like the American Rescue Plan and the much misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. Again, we've been able to push our ideas over to the Senate, things like H.R. 2, the toughest border security plan ever, things like a plan for energy independence that emphasize fossil fuel. Now, again, we don't control the Senate, so our bills aren't brought up over there. But coincidentally, a lot of things they do aren't brought up over here.
All right, Congressman, we will see what the elections yield and whether, in fact, that majority expands. But we are also thinking of you and your state in Oklahoma with these tornado warnings and recovery from the last one. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And it's The Apprentice Vice Presidential Edition. Donald Trump courts his potential running mates in Florida. We'll take a closer look at some of the potential candidates for the job. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Former President Donald Trump was back in court today on the heels of a private retreat for campaign donors at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend. Guests were told that in April, $76 million was raised between the campaign itself and the Republican National Committee. Among the attendees, several contenders to be his running mate this November. And CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins us now from New York. Bob, good to see you there. I know you're in New York covering the trial, but I do want to talk a little bit about this retreat at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend, and in terms of kind of what the Trump campaign was trying to focus on there.
Good to be with you. While former President Donald Trump has been inside the courthouse behind me all day, sitting for his criminal trial over those hush money payments to Stormy Daniels back in 2016. His campaign continues to plow ahead, and despite all of these legal challenges, Trump is trying to rally not only his supporters, but some of the biggest Republican donors in the country to stand with him, and he gathered with many of them over the weekend. What's most notable, based on our reporting at CBS News, is that Trump was searing in his criticism of these legal challenges, particularly of this trial, but also of special counsel Jack Smith at the federal level. He compared all of these prosecutions to the Gestapo, the secret police from Nazi Germany. It's, of course, a false statement to be made. He is being prosecuted here at a local level in Manhattan, also at a federal level in the United States justice system, not, of course, by the Nazis. But that kind of rhetoric from Trump indicates where he is politically. The donors are sticking with him despite him having all of these issues, despite him using language like that. And he is testing the bounds of what he can say about all of these cases, to the point where the judge, as we know, said this morning, if you don't stop talking about jurors in this case, you will face potential imprisonment.
Yeah, Bob, I want to get to that in a moment, because that's so critical here, because the former president it's not like he's stopping campaigning. And what's also interesting about this donor retreat that he had was that, he entertained several potential vice presidential picks, possibly. Is there any indication that we have about who he may be leaning towards at this moment? Of course, we may anticipate that he doesn't make this decision for quite a while.
Earlier today, the South Dakota governor, Kristi Noem, was on CBS Mornings. I got to spend some time with her behind the scenes here in New York, coincidentally. And what's notable is that she is being advised by Corey Lewandowski, the former 2016 Trump campaign manager. Corey Lewandowski was here in New York as the governor launches her latest book. And that shows you that she is close to Trump's orbit. Lewandowski remains close to Trump. Noem remains close to Trump. But regardless of what happens with this book rollout or not, she is not someone who's guaranteed the spot, but she's certainly not someone who's out of the mix at all. She is one of a number of names I'm hearing from Trump allies, Trump donors, about who could be the running mate for Trump in the next few months. I'm also hearing another person from the Dakotas, Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota. He is someone who is very wealthy, a businessman, built a tech business in his state that was later bought by Microsoft. He is seen by Trump who would be a help to him on the ticket, in the sense that he appeals to traditional Republicans as well as to Trump people. And you also hear names like Senator Tim Scott, Senator J.D. Vance, among many others. Some people seem to be floating their own names from time to time, because it seems to be an open ballgame.
Indeed, we have seen a lot of jockeying and positioning, and if we know anything from the last time around, kind of seeing this play out in public is something that we're likely to see as well, this audition process, so to speak. Bob, thank you very much for covering the campaign and the courtroom for us today. We appreciate it. Our voters dug in on their pick for president. CBS News' Anthony Salvanto joins us next to take a look at the battleground state stats.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going. The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Recent CBS News polling finds key battleground states across the country are essentially even. And that could be because so many voters are locked in on their presidential picks from 2020. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now to break down the numbers. Happy Monday, Anthony. Good to see you for this Monday segment. So what is behind all of this? Which voters are planning on changing their votes nationwide, if any?
Yeah, hey, Caitlin, I wanted to show people why we might not expect wild swings in the polling this year so far, and also why this campaign could come down to just a few folks. Now, if you look at all the polling we've done over the last few months, and you look at how people, or if people are switching from their 2020 votes to 2024, take a look at this. It's just 5%. Usually I come on, I talk about big numbers, majorities. It's just that small. Now you might say, wait a second. Well, what about independents? We always figure they're more movable. They swing more, right? Nope. If I break out just independents, it's still the same small number. It's just 6% who are switching their votes from 2020, either Biden to Trump or Trump to Biden. Now, partly this might be because it's the same two candidates. Partly this is partisans locked in. But I want to show you this example just from Pennsylvania, because even if you then ask people, okay, you're voting for Biden, you're voting for Trump, would you even consider voting for the other guy? Take a look. The numbers get even smaller. 1% of Trump voters said they would consider Joe Biden, and 2% of Biden voters saying they would consider Donald Trump. If you're a campaign, those are some of the voters you're trying to target, and it's not a lot of them, Caitlin.
Yeah, Anthony, I'm thinking about how much money has already been raised by the two campaigns and outside groups and respective committees, and trying to kind of break that down in terms of per voter cost to transfer over. That's a lot of money per voter, according to those polls, those numbers that you showed. But I'm curious kind of how this trends historically. Is there any sort of comparison, and how exactly does this impact voter turnout?
Well, let me show you this. And look, to your point, Caitlin, that's one reason that campaigns are so expensive, right? Is because campaigns are trying to target these folks, and there's not as many of them. But look, historically, if we look back at elections in the 70s and the 80s, when Reagan won in landslides, you got a quarter of Democrats voting Republican. You saw more crossover back then. But over the years and into the more recent decades from 2000, even then you got double digits. But now you're down to just 5% in 2020 who switched. Republicans were a little bit more steady in these low numbers of switching over. But even then, you're just talking about 6% who switched from Republican to voting Biden in this case in 2020. So historically, at least recently, you have been seeing lower numbers, and that is part of this partisan, hyper-partisan era that we're in, which also contributes to these small margins, Caitlin.
Yeah, becoming base elections, so to speak. Anthony Salvanto, thank you. As always, that was really interesting.
Thanks.
And let's bring in our power panel. Jasmine Wright and Daniela Diaz join us now. Jasmine is political reporter for Notice, and Daniela is a congressional reporter for Politico. Great to see you both, ladies. Thank you so much for being here. Jasmine, I want to start with you, because what Anthony was just saying there about how few, persuadable voters there are. I mean, this really feels like both camps are just trying to really rev up their base of support.
Yeah, while he was talking, I was thinking about if I was a Biden campaign staffer, that would be really good news to me, especially when we are kind of besieged with headlines that African-American voters don't like President Joe Biden. They don't want to vote for President Joe Biden, particularly men, that voters are really apathetic right now, and they don't want to put Biden necessarily in office for another term, right? So I think that works in their favor. But of course, it really still comes down to that overall question of, do you want a rematch? And a lot of these voters don't necessarily want a rematch between these two men. And I think, not just thinking about who's going to switch from Trump to Biden or Biden to Trump, one thing that Democrats are particularly worried about are the folks who stay home. Something that the vice president has said repeatedly is, losing the election to the couch. People who just don't feel involved enough in the political process, or feel like this president has done enough for their lives when it comes to the economy and other major issues, that they stay home. So I think that if you're Biden, you're probably looking at these, particularly this one in Michigan that we have in front of us, 51% for Joe Biden, 49% for Trump. Obviously a state that has come under great attention because of the response to the war in Gaza. But I think if you're looking at Biden, if you're the Biden campaign looking at these numbers, they don't look too bad. They kind of refute maybe some of the reporting that has been really dominating the past few weeks.
It's interesting to think that their biggest component could be those who don't want to show up at all. So a lot of attention paid to that. Danielle, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the Hill, which you spend so much time on. Hakeem Jeffries, of course, the Democratic leader, was on 60 Minutes last night, and he was saying that effectively Democrats have become the governing majority in Congress, given how slim the margins are. We just spoke with Tom Cole, who's the Appropriations Committee chairman, kind of about that slim margin. But I'm curious, from your perspective, reporting on Capitol Hill, is what Jeffries was saying effectively the case here?
It's complicated, Caitlin. I don't want to get too into the weeds of how things work on Capitol Hill, because it's, of course, procedure. Right. But right now, Speaker Mike Johnson can't pass bills without Democratic help. And he has a relationship with Jeffries where he's needed Jeffries and Democrats to be able to essentially move bills across the floor, as we've seen with that huge supplemental funding package to send aid to Israel and to Ukraine and to Taiwan. And essentially, the House can't do anything without Democratic support because of that razor-thin majority that Speaker Mike Johnson has. And of course, he's got this threat of a motion to vacate this week, Caitlin, that is hanging over his head. Republicans are hoping that could just happen. Marjorie Taylor Greene triggers that. They move on. Then unclear how many times she might do that. But Democrats are planning to keep help keep Mike Johnson as Speaker. So really, he's got a lot that he owes to Democrats and his position.
I mean, that is just, I know we are kind of used to that dynamic given such the slim margin, but that is just a fascinating dynamic to watch that Democrats could end up saving his job. You mentioned the Israel-Hamas war, and I'm curious, Jasmine, because I know you've been covering some of the responses to these protests that we've seen on college campuses. Today, of course, Columbia announcing that they are canceling their main graduation. What has the challenge been like for the Biden administration? I mean, today, Biden spoke with Netanyahu about a potential ceasefire deal that they are so far declining, Israel is. But this seems like a persistent problem for the president.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is so massive that it's really difficult for this White House to respond, and especially, Caitlin, to respond in a way that makes multiple people happy. I mean, if you just take President's surprise remarks last week, when talking about the protests, it felt like nobody was happy. The left wasn't happy because they felt like he didn't necessarily support protesters enough, and the right wasn't happy because, of course, he said that he would not want to call in the National Guard. So it's a tricky slope when it comes to how the president responds. I think for the president's sake himself, he has been really on the fence, touting both the commitment to the First Amendment, commitment to protest, being able to protest peacefully, but in an orderly manner. But then I think you see from the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, press secretary today, talking about how it's a shame that just a few of those protesters ruined the commencement for Columbia students altogether. So I think you're kind of seeing some mixed messaging, but clearly they want to be somewhat involved, but not so involved that they get the blame should anything happen.
Yeah, and Danielle, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic too, because Republican leadership on Capitol Hill, at least, certainly it seems like they are seeing an opening here politically.
And they've really seized on that opening. They're using what's happening specifically here in Washington on the GW campus, the George Washington University campus, and their protests as a messaging tool to try to reach voters, knowing that it's really riling their base. These situations with the protesters on these campuses that are for Palestine and speaking out against Israel. We saw, in fact, James Comer and the Oversight Committee go physically to the campus and really make a moment out of it just a few days ago. And we're going to continue seeing that. They continue to call out Democrats for not speaking out against this. Democrats, of course, really handling it the way that President Joe Biden is and trying to walk a fine line and kind of listen to both sides. But Republicans really seizing on this. And to say also, I mean, the number 4 Republican GOP chair, Elise Stefanik, the most outspoken. And of course, she has leadership ambitions as well and is really using that to her advantage.
Yeah, and of course, everyone remembers her questioning of the university president several months ago and the fallout from those hearings. Speaking of Stefanik, because she is often talked about as a potential VP contender, I know we're 6 months away from Election Day, if you can believe it. Seems like an eternity from now. But Jasmine, I mean, we're already starting to talk about potential VP picks. Over the weekend, Donald Trump had several potential candidates to his estate in Mar-a-Lago, where they raised a lot of money. I'm curious, just covering this campaign, what you make of what this process will inevitably be like.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you said, we're already talking about it, but it's not just that we're already talking about it, it's that Trump is relishing it in us talking about it. It's a showcase. He's really putting all of these folks before his donors, before his friends, trotting them out and making them audition for this role in a lot of ways. Now, I think you can talk about who's it going to be, who's it's not going to be. Obviously, some people in the news in the last few days have made the case very hard for themselves, some better for themselves. I won't name any names, but I think
who could you be talking about there? Right.
But I do think that a lot of it is about personality. When I did a VP story back at CPAC, a lot of them said, we're not going to audition, but let me tell you why I would be so good for the president, why I would be a compliment to the former president. So I think it is less about regional or who can add to the ticket or who can satisfy suburban women or all those things. And personally, who could Trump govern with? Who could Trump work with?
Right. And as we can expect, it will be a performance in a lot of ways as well. Thank you so much, both of you, Daniela and Jasmine, for being with us and for your reporting. We appreciate it.
So, Michigan, I believe that America's economy is powered by the ambition and the aspiration of her people.
The Vice President's Economic Opportunity Tour heads to the battleground state of Michigan. We'll have more from there next on America Decides.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more. Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on the groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you and your family.
Vice President Harris was in Detroit this afternoon for the latest stop on her economic tour. Our Nydia Cavazos is following the Vice President in the Motor City. Nydia, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. What are we hearing from the Vice President today?
Caitlin, it's good to be with you this afternoon. The Vice President was here in Detroit, Michigan, and she was here to tout the work that the Biden and Harris administration has done when it comes to providing economic opportunities to different communities all across the U.S. But here in Michigan specifically, she was here to announce the awarding of over $100 million to auto part manufacturers so that these facilities can then improve, can expand, and can also adequately provide their staff with proper training. But all of this, of course, is when it comes to the production of electric vehicles. Now, of course, it's also important to note that Michigan is a battleground state, and this is partially why Harris was here today.
Yeah, a battleground state indeed. No secret why they are going to these states. They're so critical to their re-election chances. She is also later this week continuing on her reproductive freedoms tour. Where will she be and what can we expect?
Like you said, all of this is part of the re-election efforts. We know that she's, on one hand, she's doing the economic opportunity tour, but also simultaneously doing the abortion rights reproductive freedoms tour. And we know that this week on Wednesday, she's going to be making a stop in Montgomery County in Pennsylvania, which happens to be another battleground state. And this, of course, shows the emphasis that the Biden and Harris campaign re-election is applying to these battleground states and being able to galvanize different types of voting blocks. And all of this is, of course, for the general election in November.
Yeah, no candidates go anywhere by accident. That is a certainty in politics, at least. Nydia Cavazos, thank you so much for being here. And the history of campus protests from Vietnam to those against the Israel-Gaza war. Can comparisons be drawn between the two movements? You're streaming America Decides.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean in
Did any of that make
What
sense?
have you learned? What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has a glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment. Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
bringing you the analysis that you need
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I wake up every morning asking what's happening in the world, why is this happening, and how do we answer that question?
These 7 miles of tunnels were the secret storage site for fuel for the Navy's Pacific Fleet in planes.
So this is one of the tanks.
Oh my gosh.
What happened 20 stories below ground is a story for 60 Minutes.
This thing that was a lifeline for the fleet is a threat.
That's right.
Columbia University has canceled their college-wide commencement ceremonies on May 15th. Instead, they are opting to hold smaller celebrations, citing security concerns. The university took similar action back in 1968 when Vietnam War protesters took over campus. The administration deciding to relocate their commencement a few blocks away from the action. Historian Rick Perlstein says that some comparisons can be made between the protests, but that the stakes were higher for those in 1968 compared to now. And Rick joins us now to discuss. Rick, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. So let's talk about some of the comparisons. Should there be any comparison to what we saw in 1968?
I'd much rather see, journalists, ordinary folks, figuring out what's going on now. I mean, there's some similarities, right? The same settings, the same sort of people. There's an enormous amount of differences. I mean, for one thing, the militarization of policing is so much profoundly more increased. If professors had been assaulted by police, like happened at Dartmouth, like happened at Washington University, like happened at the University of Wisconsin, it probably would have been on the front page of every newspaper. But these days we have snipers being posted on roofs with no indication of any real violent threat. And a lot of this has to do with a generalized rhetoric about, what it means to criticize Israel in this context. So, lots of differences. And I just encourage folks to, listen to the protesters, listen to what they're saying, and not get too distracted by what happened, what after all is, 55 years ago. Folks in the 60s weren't talking about what happened in the teens after all.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, though, because what we mentioned before about the stakes just being so high for students protesting in 1968. Tell us a little bit more about what exactly was at stake with them. I mean, obviously, given the draft.
That was a different situation because, of course, there was a draft. And in 1968, when the protests happened in May at Columbia, there were 100 soldiers being killed just about every day in Vietnam after the Tet Offensive. And if you dropped out of school, say because you got arrested, you might be drafted. The next week, the next month. The draft was completely controlled by local elites, and you could go back to your town and say they could say we're going to punish this kid by drafting him. Now, of course, the stakes are very high these days for someone being arrested because in 1968, the economy was so much stronger for college graduates. If you could graduate and you could have been an activist, and you probably could easily slide into a middle class job. These days, you might be graduating with $50, $100, $150,000 in debt, and the opportunities are simply not as great.
Yeah, last week President Biden was asked whether any of the protests would have any effect on changing policy as it pertains to the region, and he said no. But I'm curious, back in the late 1960s, the students protesting, what kind of outcomes did they achieve, if any? What were maybe some of the successes?
Yeah, it's a complicated question, the kind of thing people write whole books about. One example of a very successful wave of protest was when the entire nation, not just college kids, protested in October of 1969. They thought that they had voted in Richard Nixon to end the war, and the war was still going on. There was something called the moratorium, in which 2 million Americans stayed home from work and school. And Nixon was planning a big bombing raid against North Vietnam. It probably would have been the biggest in the history of warfare. And he realized that he didn't have the political support to do it. In terms of the context of 1968, it's really one of those things that you can't really evaluate. I mean, history is not a laboratory. And on the one hand, people were very dismayed at the disorder in the country, which they tended to associate with Democrats because they were the left of center party. On the other hand, the war was becoming so unpopular that by the time of the November election, the fact that Hubert Humphrey did not distance himself from the president and did not say he wanted to end the war probably hurt him a great deal. And when he did, right at the end of the election, the last week or so, his polling, just really jumped almost to the level that he basically tied with Richard Nixon. And then, by 1970, 1972, all the Democratic presidential candidates were saying the president has to set a date to end the war. And Richard Nixon said, I am going to end the war and I can do it better. So you can say that in that sense, the position of the protesters prevailed. But on the other hand, a lot of people became Republicans and became conservatives because they saw so much disorder in the streets.
Yeah, that's an interesting shift there. Rick Perlstein, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you, Caitlin.
On Capitol Hill, every state gets 2 statues of people who represent their history. And after more than 100 years, Arkansas is making a change. Statues of the man in black and a woman who was instrumental in the fight over school desegregation are heading to Capitol Hill. Statues of Johnny Cash and Daisy Bates will soon be installed. Cash sold more than 90 million records throughout his 5-decade career. He's a rare member of both the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Bates was an NAACP leader and mentor to the students of the Little Rock Nine. A street in downtown Little Rock is also named in her honor, and every year the state celebrates Daisy Bates Day. The duo was chosen after then-Governor Asa Hutchinson signed a law to replace the state's previous statues in 2019. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
This is CBS.